My dad's company has gone bankrupt. Because of that, the debt collectors keep turning up on our doorstep for money. They claim that they will break one of Dad's legs if he doesn't cough up the payment in 3 days. I sink down to my knees and beg my ultra-rich boyfriend, Julian Luther, to lend me $500,000 for the time being just to resolve Dad's crisis. This is my first time asking for money from Julian. Julian's brows are drawn together in a frown, but in the end he still agrees to my request. He tells me that the finance department will transfer me the money in the afternoon. My attention is glued to my phone the whole day. I keep refreshing my bank account's balance on my banking app. Just like that, I wait from morning till nightfall. But that's when Julian suddenly goes out of contact. He doesn't pick up any of my calls nor respond to any of my text messages. Anxiety floods my senses the whole time. I keep telling myself that maybe Julian has something urgent to deal with. But my need to save Dad's leg triumphs over everything else. Left without a choice, I can only take the jewelry my deceased mom has left for me to the auction house to get them auctioned away. Unexpectedly, I bump into Julian and his childhood friend, Rachel Bailey, at the auction house. Julian is quick to dump a huge sum of money just to bid for a painting Rachel wants. Ironically, the final bidding price of that painting is $500,000. It turns out that he has never forgotten about my plight. It's just that my plight is nothing compared to his crush's love for a painting. Congratulations, Mr. Luther, for winning the bid for Zack Snow's Faraway Mountains for $500,000, the auctioneer called out. The entire hall erupted in thunderous applause as a spotlight shone on the refined man sitting in the front row. Julian Luther rose to his feet and personally offered the painting to Rachel Bailey, who was seated next to him. Rachel's eyes crinkled into crescents as she said, "Thank you, Julian. I didn't expect you to actually bid on the painting just because I casually mentioned that I liked it." Julian ruffled her hair. "As long as you like it," he said adoringly. Julian was handsome, and Rachel was beautiful. They were a match made in heaven. The people around them began to whisper among themselves as they shot envious glances at them. No one noticed me in the corner, wearing a pair of jeans that had faded from too many washes. When I couldn't get in touch with Julian, I comforted myself by telling myself that he was simply too busy to pick up my calls. I convinced myself that he was so swamped with work that he had forgotten about me, forgotten how Dad's leg was on the line. An icy chill settled in my bones as I took in the gentleness glimmering in Julian's eyes. He wasn't busy, and he hadn't forgotten. He just thought that Dad's leg was far less important than fulfilling the casual wishes of the woman he loved. My heart hammered in my chest. The pain made it nearly impossible for me to breathe. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I stubbornly refused to allow them to fall. Just then, the auctioneer's voice echoed around the hall again. "Our next item is Dawn Light, a pearl necklace that was crafted by the famous jewelry designer, Ms. Wanda Tilson, before her death. The starting bid is $300,000. Dawn Light was the last thing that Mom left for me before she passed away. She told me that it represented hope and served as a reminder that the sun would always rise, no matter how dark the night was. I would never put it up for auction unless I was forced to. Unfortunately, at that moment, I had no other choice. I looked past the crowd and made eye contact with Julian. It was obvious that he had recognized the pearl necklace. The gentle expression on his face stiffened and was replaced by shock. Following his line of sight, Rachel also looked in my direction. She fixed an expression of faux surprise on her face when she saw me, covering her mouth with her hand. "What are you doing here, Cece? Didn't Mrs. Mendez leave that necklace for you after she passed away? Why are you auctioning it off?" Everyone directed their attention to me. An icy expression appeared on Julian's face. He strode toward me until he was standing right before me. I was completely enveloped by his tall and broad figure. His voice was colored with disappointment when he asked, "Do you need money that badly, Cecilia Mendez?" My heart felt like it was being sliced apart as I listened to Julian's cold words. I looked up at him and stared into his eyes that were like bottomless abysses. His eyes were devoid of any pain or regret. How could I have forgotten? From Julian's perspective, I was a woman who was willing to do anything for the sake of money. Julian and I were a couple when Dad's company became embroiled in its first financial crisis. Everyone accused me of targeting the Luther family's power and status. Now that my family had declared bankruptcy, I was essentially cementing my image of a gold digger by asking Julian for money. I didn't care about the opinions of outsiders. I was content as long as Julian knew who I really was. However, even Julian didn't believe me. He also had plenty of other reasons to dislike me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and fixed a smile on my face. That's right. I desperately need money. Why else would I be here? Did you think that I showed up to experience life, Mr. Luther? Or perhaps you've become forgetful, Mr. Luther. After all, you forgot that I begged you for money to transfer to the company. My words were like blades that stabbed into Julian's heart. He frowned deeply as the corners of his lips curled up in a mocking smile. Did you think that I would believe you, Cecilia? Why would your father's company suddenly go bankrupt when it was doing just fine? Drop the pitiful act and stop humiliating yourself in front of so many people. His words cut me deeper than any blade possibly could. I scoffed and said, "I'm selling the last thing that Mom left for me to save Dad's life. Is that really so humiliating? Or perhaps I should behave like you. Should I spend $500,000 just to make another woman happy? Would that paint me as an impressive person?" A steely expression appeared on Julian's face. Rachel hastily approached us and grabbed his arm. Attempting to play mediator, she said, "Calm down, Julian. Cece's probably just pulling your leg." She then turned to me and said, "But Cece, even if you're truly tight on cash, you shouldn't joke about Mr. Mendez's company like that. Julian will actually believe you. You should just tell him directly what you want. The two of you are a couple after all." I couldn't help but feel a sense of mocking course through me as I looked into Rachel's seemingly innocent eyes. Although she knew that I was Julian's girlfriend, she continued to cling to him without any care for boundaries. As for Julian, he seemed to be oblivious to her intentions and never pushed her away. I shot a cold glare at Rachel and snapped, "I already told Mr. Luther what I want, but he seems to be deaf to my words." The color drained from Rachel's face. She bit her lip with a troubled expression as her eyes began to rapidly redden. Julian immediately shielded her behind him and shot an icy glare at me. "I never would have guessed that you would turn into such a mean and bitter person, Cecilia. You're being completely unreasonable. Rachel is just worried about you. Why did you feel the need to speak to her so harshly?" Mean and bitter? Despair and fury raged within me, threatening to burst from my chest. I've been forced into a dead end. I had to sell the last thing that Mom left for me while my own boyfriend flirts with another woman. Do I not have the right to question you? From your perspective, Rachel is a pure and elegant fairy while I'm just a crazy bitch who only knows how to cause trouble for you. Am I right? You're being irrational," Julian exclaimed indignantly. Just then, the auctioneer began to call out prices for Dawn Light on the stage. $300,000 going once, $300,000 going twice. Are any of our esteemed guests interested in bidding for this necklace? If there's no one. $350,000, a voice suddenly called out. I looked in the direction of the voice and saw Kevin Porter. He hailed from Westview and was notorious for being a greasy man who had made a fortune in recent years. At that moment, Kevin was blatantly checking me out. Julian looked even more upset than before. I knew that Kevin wasn't interested in the necklace. He was interested in me. If I accepted his money, it would also mean that I was accepting him. However, the last dregs of hesitation within me disappeared when I saw Julian and Kevin exchange glances. I immediately understood what was going on. This was Julian's way of humiliating me. He wanted to see me in a pathetic state. He wanted to see me in pain. $350,000, the auctioneer shouted ecstatically. "Mr. Porter has bid on the necklace for $350,000. Is there anyone here who would like to challenge him and raise the price?" I straightened my back before hollering at the auctioneer, "It's a deal." I then turned to Julian and hissed, "From this moment on, we're over, Julian." I turned around and left without giving him a chance to respond. "You wouldn't dare, Cecilia Mendez." Julian roared furiously from behind me. Of course, I had every intention of defying Julian's orders. After all, there was nothing left in the world for a person to fear when they were backed into a corner. I grabbed the $350,000 check that was still warm from Kevin's body heat and rushed as quickly as I could to the appointed location. Several fierce-looking thugs surrounded Dad as they cursed him out. Dad was curled up in a corner. Gone was the spirited and charming man from before. His hair had turned white, and he looked absolutely haggard. His hazy eyes lit up when he spotted me. "What are you doing here, Cece? You have to leave right now. It's too dangerous here." "I came here to pay them, Dad." I offered the check to the leader of the thugs, a man with a scarred face. My voice was trembling slightly from fear when I said, "Here's $350,000. Please give me a few more days to collect the remaining $150,000. Scarface took the check from me and spat on it. He then shot a look of disdain at me and sneered, "A few more days? What do you take us for? A charity? You promised to deliver the money in 3 days. Your father will have to leave his leg with us if there's even a single penny missing." He then pulled out a gleaming steel pipe from behind him. The color drained from Dad's face as he frantically protected his leg. I dashed toward Dad and spread my arms, shielding him behind me. My legs were shaking violently, but I stood my ground. "I'll definitely pay you, but I won't forgive you if you lay a hand on Dad." "You won't forgive us?" Scarface repeated, letting out an amused snort and moving closer to me. "You're quite the looker, pretty lady. I can offer you a compromise. You don't have to pay the remaining $150,000 if you spend a few days with us. What do you say?" My gut churned uncomfortably as I trembled violently. Just as Scarface was about to tear my clothes apart, a few black cars roared onto the scene with one of them screeching to a stop right in front of us. A group of black-clad bodyguards stormed out of the car when the door swung open. Within seconds, they had the thugs immobilized on the ground. I watched everything unfold before me in shock. A familiar figure exited the car when the back door swung open. It was Julian. He approached me. His tall and broad silhouette cast a shadow that completely enveloped my pathetic state. Were you going to sell yourself to these men just for money, Cecilia? Are you that fond of getting involved with trash like them? I whipped my head up and stared into Julian's indifferent eyes. I could see my anguished expression reflected in his gaze. How dare you criticize me, Julian? I roared furiously. I got on my knees and begged you to lend me $500,000 to save Dad's life. Like a fool, I waited for an entire day for you, only to find out that you were spending a small fortune on another woman at an auction. Why didn't you pick up any of my calls, even though I called you so many times? Do you even know that if I had been a minute too late, Dad might have lost his leg? You're the one who forced me into a dead end, and yet you're turning the tables on me and criticizing me? What gives you the right to do such a thing? I screamed hysterically. Julian's face twisted as a glint of remorse flickered in his eyes. He recalled how I had begged him, how he had promised to help me. Just then, Rachel got out of the car. She placed a gentle hand on his arm and shot a troubled look at me, saying, "Don't blame Julian, Cece. I'm the one who distracted him by asking him to buy the painting for me. I just liked it too much. He only forgot his promise because of me." She paused for a moment as she swept her gaze over the thugs on the ground. "But Cece," she continued, "even if Julian was busy bidding on the painting for me, you shouldn't degrade yourself to such a level just for the sake of money. Have you forgotten about what happened to Jillian?" "Shut up." Julian interrupted her before she could finish her sentence, but the rage that he had been suppressing reached a boiling point once more. His eyes burned with hatred as he glared at me. "You're just as despicable as ever, Cecilia Mendez," he gritted out. "You sent someone to their death 10 years ago, because of the same circumstances. Who are you trying to kill this time?" An icy sensation gripped my heart as tears spilled down my cheeks. I opened my mouth, wanting to explain myself. I wanted to tell him that the circumstances were different 10 years ago. However, my words turned into a silent, bitter laugh when they left my lips. From Julian's perspective, I was already a criminal. "Julian Luther," I said calmly, "you've never believed me." I pulled Dad, who was still in a state of shock, to his feet. We then staggered away from that place that suffocated me. Dad and I moved out of our old home overnight. I also changed my number and found a new job as a waitress in a cafe. One afternoon, I was wiping glasses behind the counter. There weren't many customers in the cafe that day. The wind chime on the door suddenly tinkled. Reflexively, I lifted my head and said, "Welcome." The glass slipped from my hands when I got a good look at the newcomers. It fell to the floor and shattered into a million pieces. Julian stood at the entrance of the cafe with Rachel standing right behind him. He was dressed in an expensive tailored suit while I was wearing a cheap uniform with coffee stains. It was as if there was an unsurpassable rift between us. Julian swept his gaze over the name tag that was pinned to my chest. His lips curled up into a mocking smile as he sneered. "I was wondering how capable you were, Cecilia. So you can only wait tables in this sort of place after leaving me." Meanwhile, Rachel locked arms with him and shot a sympathetic look at me. "Why are you working here, Cece? You must be having such a tough time. Why don't you help her, Julian? You could assign her to an easy position." "She doesn't need it," Julian snapped while keeping his eyes trained on me, interrupting her before she could finish her sentence. "She's stubborn to a fault, isn't she? Well, I'm curious to see just how much she values her stubbornness." I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms. The cafe manager hurried over to us when he heard the commotion. He immediately nodded and greeted Julian when he spotted him. "What are you doing here, Mr. Luther? Please have a seat." Julian didn't even spare him a single glance. Instead, his eyes were trained on a small, porcelain cat figure that was placed on the shelf behind me. I had personally made the cat figure during my spare time. It looked identical to the one that I had given Julian Luther, Julian's younger sister, years ago. Julian's eyes widened, and he began breathing heavily. He pointed at the cat figure and hissed with barely contained anger. "Who does that belong to?" My heart plummeted into my gut. The color drained from the manager's face. He pointed at me and hastily explained himself. He was firmly drawing a line between himself and me. "Cecilia was the one who brought it here, Mr. Luther. It has nothing to do with my cafe." Julian stepped forward and grabbed the porcelain cat figure. Ignoring the shriek I let out, he didn't hesitate for even a second before he hurled it to the floor. The cat figure that held the last memories that I shared with Jillian shattered into a million pieces. It would be impossible to piece it back together. Julian's chest heaved. He picked up a broken shard of porcelain from the floor and stalked toward me. I subconsciously backed away, but it didn't take long before my back hit the wall. I was trapped with no hope of escape. "Why do you have to keep reminding me, Cecilia?" Julian roared. His warm breath fanned across my face, but I couldn't help but feel as if I was facing the icy pits of hell. "Your face constantly reminds me that my sister is dead while you, her murderer, are still alive and well." "Murderer," I repeated over and over again. The unbearable pain numbed my heart. Tell me. How should I punish you? Julian suddenly whipped his head up and coldly barked his orders at his 2 bodyguards, who were standing behind him. Keep her in place. The bodyguard stepped forward and grabbed my shoulders, immobilizing me. My eyes widened in fear. I could only watch as Julian pressed the broken shard into one of the bodyguard's palms. Use this. Carve the word murderer into her arm. No, I screamed hysterically. The cafe manager and the other staff members were cowering in fear in a corner and trembling violently. None of them dared to step forward to help me. The color had drained from Rachel's face. It seemed that she hadn't expected Julian to do something so insane. The bodyguard emotionlessly raised his hand. The sharp edges of the broken porcelain shard glinted blindingly in the light. I watched as the shard was brought closer and closer to my arm. The sharp, jagged edge of the broken porcelain shard hovered less than an inch from my bare forearm. I could smell the metallic tang of the wet clay, mixed with the sour, stale coffee grounds on my apron. My breath caught in my throat, my lungs freezing as the bodyguard's heavy grip tightened on my shoulders, pinning me against the damp plaster of the cafe wall. Julian, please. Rachel suddenly screamed, her voice cracking with a sudden, sharp panic. She lunged forward, grabbing Julian's sleeve, her knuckles turning a pasty white. There are cameras. The street outside. Someone will see. The Luther Group stock can't take another public scandal right now. Julian didn't look at her. His eyes, dark and bloodshot, were fixed entirely on my face. He was searching for something. Tears, a plea for mercy, the familiar, submissive terror I used to show whenever he brought up his sister's name. But he found nothing. I stared back at him. My jaw clamped shut so tightly my teeth ached. My eyes were wide, but they were dry. The despair that had hollowed out my chest over the last 3 days had left me completely numb. If he wanted to carve the word into my flesh, let him. Let him carry the mark of what he truly was, a monster who used his wealth to torture a bankrupt girl while his sister's actual ghost laughed in the dark. Do it, Julian hissed, his voice dropping into a low, rattling growl. The bodyguard pressed the shard down. The sharp porcelain sliced through the thin cotton of my sleeve, biting into the skin of my upper arm. A sharp, hot sting shot straight to my brain. I didn't scream. I didn't even gasp. I simply watched a thin, dark line of crimson well up from the tear, staining the white fabric of my uniform. Julian, stop. Rachel shrieked, physically pulling on the bodyguard's arm. You're going to jail. Stop it. Whether it was Rachel's scream, or the sight of the blood blooming on my sleeve, Julian's face suddenly went rigid. A flicker of something, not pity but a violent, visceral shock, crossed his eyes. He grabbed the bodyguard's wrist, his grip so tight the man's fingers lost their hold on the porcelain. The shard fell to the floor, landing with a dull, wet clatter on the linoleum. Get out, Julian whispered, his chest heaving under his expensive wool coat. I didn't move. The bodyguard slowly released my shoulders, stepping back into the shadows of the doorway. I said, get out of this city, Cecilia, Julian snarled, his voice trembling with a raw, unhinged fury. If I see your face in Westview again, I won't just break your father's other leg. I'll make sure the Mendez name is erased from every public record in the state. Now go. I slowly reached down, my fingers numb as I unpinned the cheap plastic name tag from my chest. I laid it on the counter, next to the shattered pieces of the porcelain cat. I didn't look at Julian. I didn't look at Rachel's pale, trembling face. I walked past them, my boots crunching on the broken shards, and stepped out into the cold, gray rain of the afternoon. 300 miles away, the wind off the Atlantic carried the scent of salt, rotting kelp, and the diesel grease of the fishing trawlers. I stood behind the counter of the Rusty Hook, a small, drafty fish market at the end of the public pier in Blackwood Cove. My hands, once soft and manicured during my days as Julian's girlfriend, were rough, red, and covered in small, silver fish scales. Cece, we need 2 boxes of cod ice down for the morning delivery. The owner, an old, bearded man named Captain Joe, called out from the back. On it, Joe, I called back, my voice flat and raspy from the cold air. I dragged a heavy wooden crate of crushed ice across the concrete floor, my upper arm twinging with a dull, stiff pain. Beneath the sleeve of my thick flannel shirt, a jagged 3-inch silver scar sat against my skin, the permanent mark of Julian's porcelain shard. It had healed poorly in the damp coastal air, leaving a raised, white line that throbbed whenever the weather turned cold. Dad was sitting on a wooden stool near the small space heater in the corner, a woolen blanket draped over his knees. His leg had healed, but he walked with a heavy, dragging limp that required a cane. The stress of the bankruptcy and the flight from Westview had aged him 10 years. His hair was completely white, his hands constantly trembling as he held a cup of hot black tea. Cece, he murmured, his hazy eyes tracking my movements. You should take a break. Your arm. It's going to start aching again if you keep hauling those crates. I'm fine, Dad, I said, giving him a tight, reassuring smile as I shoveled ice over the fish. The doctor said as long as I keep the muscles moving, the scar tissue won't tighten. I ruined you, he whispered, a tear sliding down his wrinkled cheek. If I hadn't lost the company, if I hadn't taken those loans, you'd still be in Westview. You'd still have your life. I didn't have a life in Westview, Dad, I said, walking over and kneeling beside his stool, taking his cold, shaking hands in mine. I had a cage. Here. The air is cold, and the work is hard, but nobody is trying to carve murderer into my skin. We have a roof, we have food, and we have each other. That's more than enough. He squeezed my hands, his head nodding slowly, though the sorrow in his eyes didn't fade. At 4 p.m, the market closed. I helped Dad down the wooden steps of the pier, our boots squeaking on the wet planks. The sky was a heavy slate gray, the fog rolling off the water like thick steam. As we reached our small, rented cottage near the dunes, a dark, nondescript sedan was parked by the wooden fence. A man was standing near the gate, wearing a heavy trench coat and a woolen flat capitul. He looked to be in his late 60s, his face lined with the deep, weathered folds of a retired cop, his eyes sharp and gray behind his spectacles. Cecilia Mendez? He asked, his voice low and gravelly. I instinctively stepped in front of Dad, my hand tightening around his wooden cane. Who are you? If you're from the Luther group. I'm not from the Luthers, the man said, pulling a leather wallet from his pocket and showing me a silver badge that was faded with age. My name is Detective Robert Vance. I was the lead investigator on the Julian Luther case 10 years ago. The small living room of our cottage was warm, smelling of the pine logs burning in the stone fireplace. Detective Vance sat on the old plaid sofa, a manila folder with yellowed edges, resting on his knees. He didn't drink the tea I had poured for him. His eyes remained fixed on the fire, his expression heavy with a decade of accumulated guilt. I retired 5 years ago, Ms. Mendez, Vance said, his voice quiet against the sound of the wind rattling the window panes. But I couldn't leave this case behind. 10 years ago, when Julian Luther died in that school storage room, the pressure from the Luther family was immense. They wanted a culprit immediately. The media was screaming, the politicians were calling the chief. Everyone wanted a head on a spike. And you gave them mine, I said, my voice cold. I did, Vance admitted, his shoulders sagging. The evidence was too neat. The key to the storage room was found in your locker. Rachel Bailey gave a statement, claiming she saw you arguing with Jillian near the gym 20 minutes before the door was locked. And because your father's company was struggling, everyone assumed you were trying to extort the Luthers. He opened the folder, revealing a series of old, black and white crime scene photos. But 3 months ago, the school board decided to demolish the old Westview Academy building to build a new athletic complex. During the demolition, the construction crew tore down the old internal server room behind the main office. He pulled a small silver flash drive from the folder and laid it on the table. The school had an old, analog security system that we were told had been completely destroyed in a fire the night after Jillian died. But it wasn't. The backup tapes were stored in a fireproof steel box beneath the floorboards. The crew found them. And because my name was still listed on the cold case file, the department sent them to me. I stared at the silver drive. My heart began to beat in a slow, heavy rhythm, a cold sweat breaking out across my neck. What's on it, detective? Dad asked, his voice shaking. The truth, Vance said. The video shows the entire corridor leading to the storage room on the afternoon of November 14th. He pressed a button on his portable tablet, loading the video file. The screen displayed a grainy black and white view of the school corridor. The timestamp read 3:14 p.m. 2 young girls walked into the frame. One was Julian Luther, wearing her school cardigan. The other was Rachel Bailey. They were arguing. Jillian was pointing her finger at Rachel, her face red with anger, while Rachel was crying, her hands holding her ears. Jillian had found out that Rachel was stealing money from the student council fund to pay for her mother's gambling debts, Vance explained. Jillian was going to tell her brother that night. On the screen, the argument moved toward the open door of the storage room. Jillian walked inside to retrieve her backpack. The moment Jillian's back was turned, Rachel did not follow her. Instead, she grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak door, slammed it shut, and turned the key that was sitting in the keyhole. She locked her best friend inside. The video showed Rachel standing in the empty corridor for nearly 5 minutes. Jillian was pounding on the glass window of the door, her face contorted with panic as she screamed for help. Rachel simply watched her, her face perfectly calm, before she slid the key into her pocket, turned around and walked away. The fire that broke out in the adjacent chemistry lab 30 minutes later wasn't an accident, Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The security Footage shows Rachel returning to the corridor with a bottle of solvent she had taken from the lab. She spilled it under the door of the server room and lit a match. She wanted to destroy the tapes. I sat frozen on the floor, the heat of the fireplace suddenly feeling like ice against my skin. 10 years. For 10 years, I had been called a murderer. I had been dragged through the mud, forced to drop out of college, bankrupt my father, and watch my mother die of grief. All because of a lie created by a girl who had watched her best friend suffocate in a burning room to save her own skin. Why are you showing this to me, detective? I asked, my voice trembling with a raw bleeding pain. Why not go to the prosecutor? I went, Vance said. But the Luther Group's legal team is incredibly powerful. Ms. Mendez. Rachel Bailey is currently engaged to Julian Luther. If I present this to the local DA, the Luthers will find a way to tie it up in technicalities, or claim the tape was manipulated. They have the money to bury this forever. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and serious. But if you present it, Cecilia, if you bring it to Julian himself, the system won't be able to protect her. Because the only person in Westview who has more power than the law is Julian Luther. And he is the one who has spent 10 years sleeping next to his sister's killer. The grand ballroom of the Westview Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering crystal, white orchids, and the quiet, heavy scent of expensive champagne. Julian Luther stood near the grand ice sculpture in the center of the room, a glass of champagne held loosely in his fingers. He was dressed in an immaculate black tuxedo, his hair styled perfectly, his face refined and handsome. But his eyes were dead. Julian, honey, look. Rachel's voice was high and sweet as she walked over from the VIP lounge, her white silk engagement gown trailing behind her on the polished marble. She held up her left hand, where a 5-carat diamond ring glinted blindingly in the light. The photographer wants us to stand near the fountain for the main shoot. Come on. Julian didn't move. He looked at her perfect, beautiful face and felt nothing but a cold, hollow emptiness. For 6 months, since the afternoon he had driven Cecilia out of the city, he had been haunted by a memory. Not the memory of his sister's death, but the memory of the thin line of red blooming on Cecilia's white sleeve, and the quiet, dry look in her eyes as she walked out into the rain. He had tried to fill the void by throwing money at Rachel, buying her paintings, jewelry, cars, and this grand engagement party. But every time he looked at Rachel's smile, he felt a strange, sickening sense of disgust. Julian. Rachel's smile faltered, her brows furrowing. What's wrong with you? Today? You've been staring at the door for hours. Nothing, Julian muttered, taking a sip of his drink. Suddenly, the double oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The chatter in the room died down, a heavy, confused silence spreading across the crowd as the guests turned to look at the newcomer. I walked into the ballroom. I wasn't wearing a designer gown, and I wasn't wearing a cheap cafe uniform. I wore a simple, dark wool coat, my boots muddy from the rain outside, my hair damp and wild. My face was pale, but my eyes were like hot coals in the dim light of the chandeliers. Beside me walked Detective Robert Vance, his old police badge pinned to his coat collar, a manila folder held firmly under his arm. Cecilia. Rachel gasped, her face turning an instant, pasty white. She clutched Julian's arm, her voice rising in a panicked screech. Security. Why is she here? I told you she was banned from the hotel. Julian didn't call security. He stood frozen, his glass of champagne slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor with a sharp, echoing crash. He looked at my face, then at my arm, where the sleeve of my coat was pulled back, revealing the jagged white scar he had carved into my skin. Cecilia, he whispered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? I came to deliver a wedding present, Julian. I said, my voice clear and cold, echoing through the silent ballroom. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the silver flash drive, and threw it onto the polished floor. It slid across the marble, stopping right at the tip of his shiny leather shoes. What is that? Julian asked, his brow furrowing. It's the security tape from Westview Academy, I said, looking straight into Rachel's wide, terrified eyes. The one from November 14th, 10 years ago. The one you thought you burned, Rachel. She's lying. Rachel shrieked, her voice reaching a frantic, hysterical register as she grabbed Julian's lapels, her diamond ring scratching the fabric of his suit. Julian, she's crazy. She's trying to ruin our day. Don't look at it. Destroy it. Detective Vance, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet as he ignored Rachel's cries. Is this real? It's real, Mr. Luther, Vance said, stepping forward. The State Forensics Lab has already certified the digital signature of the file. The video shows Rachel Bailey locking Julian in the storage room and setting fire to the server room to cover her tracks. Julian slowly reached down. His hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a raw, boiling current of shock that was rising from his chest. He picked up the silver flash drive. Julian, please. Rachel fell to her knees, her white silk dress pooling around her on the wet marble where his champagne had spilled. She grabbed his knees, her tears finally falling, leaving gray tracks down her cheeks. I didn't mean to. I was just scared. Jillian was going to tell you about the money. She was going to make you hate me. I just wanted to hide her for a little bit. I didn't know the fire would spread so fast. The ballroom went completely silent. The guests, the wealthy executives, the socialites, the politicians, all stared at the kneeling bride in her white silk dress, their mouths half open in absolute, suffocating shock. Julian didn't look at her. He looked at the flash drive in his hand, then looked up at me. In that instant, the 10 years of hatred, grief, and self-righteous fury that had driven his life completely disintegrated, leaving nothing but a vast, silent and empty ruin. He remembered how he had treated me. He remembered the auction, where he had bid $500,000 to make Rachel happy while my father's leg was on the line. He remembered the cafe, where he had ordered his bodyguards to pin me down and carve the word murderer into my arm. He looked at the white scar on my sleeve. Cecilia, he whispered, his knees buckling as he took a step toward me. Looked as if he were about to fall to his knees, his face pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot with a sudden, agonizing realization. My God, what have I done to you? You didn't believe me, Julian, I said, my voice perfectly flat and calm. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply stood before him, a survivor of a war he had started, and let the silence of the room answer his question. The double doors at the back of the ballroom opened again. 2 police officers in blue uniforms walked in, their boots clicking on the marble. They walked straight to the front of the room, bypassed Julian, and pulled Rachel to her feet. Click, click. The heavy steel handcuffs locked around her wrists, the silver metal contrasting sharply with the white silk of her engagement gown. Rachel Bailey, the officer said, his voice professional and cold. You are under arrest for involuntary manslaughter, framing, and arson. As they dragged her away, her screams echoing through the grand lobby of the hotel, Julian stood in the center of the room, his head bowed, his hands shaking so violently the silver drive fell from his fingers and clattered onto the floor. He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading hope. Cecilia, please. Let me make it up to you. I'll give you the company back. I'll buy your father the best medical care. I'll do anything. Just tell me how to fix this. I looked at him, this powerful, wealthy man who had ruled my life for a decade, now reduced to a shivering, broken shell in his own luxury ballroom. You can't fix it, Julian, I said softly. I can. I have the money, the power. You have the money, Julian, I said, turning my back on him. But you don't have the time. And you don't have me. I walked toward the exit, my boots clicking softly on the marble floor. 6 months later. The wind off the Atlantic was cold, but the sun was bright, lighting up the blue surface of the water like a sheet of silver. I stood on the wooden deck of our new, larger cottage near the harbor. The Jensen Mendez Logistics firm, a small regional shipping company Dad and I had started with the legal settlement from the state and the city, was thriving. We had 3 trucks, a small warehouse by the docks, and a reputation for honesty that had made us the preferred partners for the local fishermen. Dad was sitting on a wooden chair on the deck, a warm woolen blanket over his knees, his hands holding a cup of hot chamomile tea. His leg was still weak, but he didn't need the cane to walk to the gate anymore. His face was full, his eyes bright and clear, the gray lines of exhaustion completely erased from his skin. Cece, Captain Joe called out from the pier. The morning delivery is fully cleared. We're ready for the Q3 audits. Excellent, Joe, I called back, my voice warm as I leaned against the wooden railing. My right sleeve was rolled up to my elbow. The white scar on my arm was still visible, a jagged silver line against my tan skin, but it no longer throbbed. When the weather turned cold, it was no longer a mark of shame. It was a medal of survival. My phone on the table buzzed. It was an automated notification from the Westview Business Registry. The Luther Group had officially entered bankruptcy proceedings after a series of massive internal frauds were exposed following Rachel's trial. Julian Luther had resigned as CEO and was currently living in a private care facility upstate, his mind reportedly broken by the scandal. I locked the phone and slid it into my pocket. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel satisfied. I simply looked out at the sea, where the white gulls were soaring through the clean blue sky, their wings catching the morning light as they flew toward the horizon. The night had been long, cold, and dark, but the sun had finally risen, and for the first time in 10 years, I was completely, beautifully free.